Ben Cole was born into a family that, from the outside, seemed like a dream. A grand estate, lavish parties, luxury cars. Everything reflected the power of the Cole family. But behind the heavy oak doors lay a world far different from what people imagined. His father, James Cole, was a ruthless businessman, a man who never accepted failure. He didn't just run a financial empire, he controlled his wife, Elena Cole, as well. She had once been a strong, vibrant woman, but over time she grew quiet and lifeless. Ben still remembered those nights crouched behind the staircase, listening to his parents argue. The fights never ended, leaving only coldness and fear. When he was 8 years old, his mother tried to escape. She held him close, whispering, "We're going somewhere new, my love, a place where I can breathe, a place where these walls can't trap us." But before they could leave, his father found out. That night burned itself into Ben's memory. His mother on her knees, tears falling onto the cold marble floor, while James Cole towered over her, his voice calm but absolute. "Did you really think you could leave me, Elena?" She never tried to run again. From that moment, Ben learned one thing. Love was not the beautiful thing people spoke of in fairy tales. Love was a cage, and once inside, you could never escape. And so, he made a vow to himself. He would never love anyone, and he would never have children. Years passed, but Ben Cole's vow remained unchanged. With razor-sharp intelligence and ruthless ambition, he built a tech empire, Caltech. In just a decade, he propelled his company to the top, becoming the youngest billionaire in the industry. But despite his wealth and power, Ben remained an isolated man. To his employees, he was a flawless CEO, but distant. No one dared to get too close. To his rivals, he was a nightmare, a man who never made mistakes. To women, he was a wealthy, desirable man, but one without a heart. Ben didn't believe in love or marriage. He had watched love destroy his mother, turning her from a strong woman into a hollow shadow inside her own home. He would rather stand alone at the top than become a man like his father. Every day was the same. Work, multi-million-dollar deals, endless meetings. He never allowed himself to rest, never searched for anything beyond success. And he thought he could live his entire life that way. Until he met Alice Carter. Alice Carter never imagined her life would intertwine with a man as cold and distant as Ben Cole. As a top interior designer, Alice had worked with many wealthy and influential clients, but none had intrigued her as much as Ben. Their first meeting happened when she was hired to redesign the new headquarters of Caltech, a critical project for the company. On her first visit, Alice stepped into the towering building where everything was sleek, modern, and lifeless, much like the man waiting for her in the conference room. Ben Cole. He was tall, impeccably dressed, yet exuded an aura of complete detachment from the world around him. When Alice approached, he barely spared her a glance. But Alice had never been someone easily intimidated by power. She smiled professionally and extended her hand. "Mr. Cole, I hope my designs will meet your expectations." Ben shook her hand briefly, his deep voice devoid of warmth. No complaints, no praise, no feedback. Alice simply smiled. "That's a relief then." Ben raised an eyebrow slightly. She wasn't flustered by his coldness. She wasn't trying to impress him or seek his approval. Alice was simply herself. And that was precisely why, for the first time in a long time, Ben found himself noticing someone more than he wanted to admit. The relationship between Ben and Alice had no labels, no commitments, yet it wasn't meaningless either. The design project lasted for months, and during that time, Alice became the only person who could talk to Ben naturally. They often shared meals after long meetings, discussing work but occasionally drifting into personal conversations. Alice realized that Ben wasn't as emotionless as he seemed. Sometimes she caught him watching people in quiet observation, as if he was standing outside a world he didn't belong to. On late nights when work stretched beyond expectations, they sat in the office together. Alice made coffee. Ben drank in silence. There were no unnecessary words, just a quiet comfort in each other's presence. Ben was never one to open up easily, but he didn't push Alice away either. And then, one evening, as they dined at an upscale restaurant after an important meeting, Alice casually asked, "Have you ever thought about having kids?" It was a simple question, yet it made Ben go completely still. He set his glass down, fingers tightening around it, his gaze turning sharp and unreadable. After a long pause, his voice came out deep and unwavering. "No." Alice studied him, feeling something in her chest sink. It wasn't that he hadn't considered it. He had already made up his mind, and his decision was absolute. He forced a smile, quickly changing the subject as if the question had never been asked. But from that moment on, Alice understood one thing. She loved him, but her love couldn't change the fact that they wanted different things in life. Alice stared at the pregnancy test in her hand, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her chest. 2 red lines, she was pregnant. The first emotion wasn't fear. It was a strange, quiet happiness. Ever since she was young, Alice had dreamed of a loving family, a home where she could care for and protect her child. But then, Ben's face appeared in her mind. She remembered his cold, unwavering response when she had asked about children. No, it wasn't that he hated kids. It was that he never wanted to be a father. Alice knew that if she told Ben he wouldn't be happy. Maybe he would take responsibility, but not because he truly wanted to. And the one thing she never wanted was for her child to grow up with a father who only stayed out of obligation. Alice spent days thinking. She wanted to believe that if Ben knew, he would change, that he would realize a child wasn't a burden, but a miracle. But that was just her hope. She knew the truth wasn't that simple. Ben wasn't a man who easily changed the beliefs ingrained in his mind. And then Alice understood. She couldn't just think about herself anymore. She wasn't alone anymore. She had to protect her child, even if that meant walking away from the man she loved most. And so Alice left. She resigned from her job, packed her belongings, and moved to a new city where no one knew her, where she could start over, a life without Ben. On the day she left, she stood in front of her apartment one last time, remembering every moment she had spent with Ben. She left no letter, no trace, because Alice knew one thing. If Ben truly wanted to find her, he would. 5 years had passed. Ben Cole was still the same man, cold, focused on his work, never letting anyone into his world. But one thing had changed. Since the day Alice disappeared, there had been an emptiness inside him that he couldn't explain. He never searched for her, believing that if she wanted to leave, then he had no reason to stop her. But deep down, every night, he found himself wondering, where is she? And why did she leave without a word? Then one day, his entire world shattered. During a business trip to a small city where Coltech was negotiating an acquisition deal, Ben stopped by a quiet cafe with his assistant. He thought nothing of the place, just another cafe in a city he would soon forget. But then everything stopped. The moment he stepped inside, his eyes locked onto a familiar figure in the corner. Alice. She sat by the window, bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sun. She still looked the same, elegant, composed, but her eyes were different now. There was peace in them, but also a distance he had never seen before. Yet, it wasn't Alice who truly made Ben freeze in place. It was the little boy sitting beside her, a child with the same piercing eyes as him. Ben couldn't breathe. In that instant, everything collapsed. Alice had been pregnant when she left him. That boy was his son. But before Ben could even take a step forward, another man approached. And when the stranger placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, his deep voice rang out. "Son, have you been waiting long for Daddy?" The air shattered. Ben stood frozen, feeling as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. The boy called that man Dad. For 5 years, he hadn't just lost Alice. He had lost his own child. Ben stood frozen. It felt as if his entire world had shattered, but he couldn't take his eyes off the child. His son. The boy was smiling at another man, a pure, innocent smile that Ben had never been given the chance to see. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Why had Alice never told him? Why had she raised their child alone for 5 years? And most importantly, was there still a place for him in her life? Before Ben could compose himself, Alice turned around. Her entire body stiffened when she saw him. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Ben's entire body tensed. He wanted to move, to speak, but for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. He had faced some of the most ruthless businessmen in the world, closed billion-dollar deals without hesitation. But now, standing in front of Alice, he felt completely out of control. Taking a deep breath, he finally spoke, his voice low and sharp. "We need to talk." Alice took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had known this day would come, but she hadn't expected it to happen like this. She glanced at her son, then gave a small nod. For the first time in 5 years, Ben and Alice were face to face again. Alice led Ben to a quiet cafe nearby. They sat across from each other, but the distance between them had never felt greater. Ben met her gaze, his voice low but unwavering. "That boy, he's mine, isn't he?" Alice closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Yes." Ben clenched his fists. 5 years. 5 years he had lived in ignorance, while his son grew up never knowing his father even existed. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice dropped lower, laced with pain. Alice let out a small laugh, but it wasn't one of joy. "Because you never wanted a child. If you had truly cared, Ben, you would have looked for me." Ben froze. He couldn't argue, because she was right. Alice held his gaze, her voice steady but firm. "You want to meet him, don't you?" Ben didn't hesitate. "Yes." Alice took a deep breath. "All right, but if you hurt him, then don't ever come back." The next day, Ben arrived at the park where Alice had arranged for them to meet. The moment he got there, his eyes immediately landed on the little boy, Theo. The child was playing happily, completely unaware that the man standing nearby was his real father. Alice knelt beside her son, her voice gentle. "Theo, this is a friend of mine. His name is Ben." Theo looked up at Ben, his bright blue eyes filled with curiosity. "Do you like superheroes?" Theo asked suddenly. Ben blinked, caught off guard by the simple question that somehow made his chest tighten. After a brief pause, he answered. "Yes." Theo's face lit up. "Then, do you know who's the strongest?" "I think it's Spider-Man." Ben let out a soft chuckle, for the first time in a long while. "Well, little guy, I'd say Iron Man is pretty strong too." Theo frowned for a second, then burst into laughter. And just like that, the ice inside Ben's heart began to melt. In that moment, for the first time, he felt something that neither wealth nor power had ever given him before. In the weeks that followed, Ben slowly became a part of Theo's life. He didn't rush or force the boy to accept him. He simply showed up, listening to superhero stories, taking Theo to the park, helping him learn to ride a bike. Alice watched from a distance. She couldn't deny that Ben had changed. He was no longer the cold, work-obsessed man he once was. One evening, after walking Theo home, Ben suddenly said, "I spent years believing love was a weakness, that having a family would trap me. But now I know the truth. I was never afraid of love. I was afraid of losing it. I don't want to stand alone anymore, Alice. I want you and Theo in my life. Not out of obligation, but because I truly want this." Alice stared at him, her heart skipping a beat. Ben pulled out a ring, his gaze unwavering. "Alice, you may not believe me right now, but give me a chance. Let me prove that this time I won't leave." Alice found herself at a loss for words. For the first time, Ben Cole wasn't running from love. Alice looked at Ben, her heart overflowing with emotion. She had once loved him, once believed they had no future. But now, the man standing before her was no longer the same Ben Cole from 5 years ago. She took a deep breath, then nodded. "Yes." A rare smile spread across Ben's lips. But this time, he didn't rush. He waited, his heart pounding as Alice stared at the ring. For a moment she hesitated, memories of the past flickering in her mind. But then, Tears welled in her eyes, and she whispered, "Yes." Ben let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, and before Alice could say another word, he pulled her into a deep kiss, as if he had been waiting for this moment forever. From a distance, Theo cheered excitedly, running toward them and wrapping his small arms around both of them. For the first time in his life, Ben no longer felt empty. He had found his real family. A peaceful morning. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, casting a soft golden glow over the cozy space. Alice slowly opened her eyes, feeling the warmth of comfort and love surrounding her. Beside her, Ben was still fast asleep, one arm draped over her waist, a habit he had developed over time. She smiled as she noticed Theo, their little boy, curled up in Ben's arms. No one would have believed that the man who once feared love and responsibility could now hold his son so naturally. She thought back to the day Theo had first called Ben Dad. It was the moment the last wall inside Ben crumbled, allowing him to fully accept that he was no longer alone. Outside, birds chirped in the garden Alice had carefully nurtured since they moved into this house. It was Sunday, a special day in their family, the day when Ben took over the kitchen to make breakfast for Alice and Theo. Ben stirred beside her, his eyes still heavy with sleep, but the moment he saw Alice, a soft smile crossed his lips. "Good morning, my love," he murmured, his voice deep and warm. Theo woke up as well, rubbing his eyes before grinning excitedly. "Dad, can we make pancakes today?" Ben chuckled, reaching over to ruffle his son's hair. "Of course, but I'll need my little chef to help me." The three of them headed to the kitchen, the air filled with laughter. Alice stood back for a moment, watching father and son make a mess while attempting breakfast. Who would have thought that the once cold and distant CEO would now be in the kitchen, wearing an apron, struggling to flip pancakes for his son? Alice quietly stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Ben from behind. He tensed for a split second, then relaxed, smiling as he reached for her hand. "I used to think happiness was standing alone at the top," Ben said softly. "But now I know real happiness is mornings like this, with you and Theo." Alice rested her head against his back, feeling the warmth of a family she once thought she would never have. And in that moment, she knew they had found each other, and this time they would never let go. Happiness, sometimes, is just that simple.